Zoom recording. We are recording, and we are recording here. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We have a big day, Parashat Shemot. We're starting a new Sefer, very exciting. We have some beautiful dedications today. I want to thank Esther Adis and her family for sponsoring this week's class in loving memory of her grandmother, Lulu Bat Salha, and also Leilui Nishmat Selma Kassin, her mother, Selma Bat Lulu, who would have celebrated her 100th birthday last month. We also have another very beautiful dedication, Leilui Nishmat Naftali Gad, Naftali Ben Leah, and Nisan Gad Alav HaShalom, by Shifra Gad, Vanessa Gad, Lily Ishai, and Peggy Dahan. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful way to honor somebody and their memory. And last but not least, this is the cutest sponsorship you're ever going to hear, I think. My friends Sheba and Robbie Mandel. You know them. They're the ones that sit together in class if you come to the Monday class. They're the cutest couple. And they are dedicating the class today in honor of Robbie's birthday and in honor of their joy of learning together. It's a joy to have them learning with us. They contribute tremendously to all the classes, and I'm happy to call them my friends. If you can open your Chumashim to Parashat Shemot in the blue books, it's page 292. It's chapter 1 in the book of Shemot. We're going to get started right away. Reading that first pasuk will give us a sense of where the Sefer is taking us. It starts with Ve'ele Shemot B'nei Yisrael Haba'im Mitzrayma Et Yaakov Ish Ubeto Ba'u. We really could spend the whole class just on this first opening pasuk. We're not going to, but just to give us a sense of how the Torah in its expression is telling us these are the names of Bnei Israel. We're going to start with the macro. We're going to start with the global view. We're going to start with the wide lens on our camera. And then it's going to say, so we're going to start with Bnei Yisrael. We're going to start with this idea of our people as a nation, which is very, very interesting, because coming off of Bereshit, the focus was on the family. The focus was on the micro unit. And as we progressed through the book of Bereshit, it seemed like the lens was getting wider and wider until ultimately we became a nation. We were Shiv'im Nefesh that came down to Egypt. We started to see ourselves not as tiny microscopic, but as a much wider populated group. Now we start with Shemot, and they say, these are the names of Bnei Israel. These are the names of the national persona, Yisrael, who were coming to Egypt. And then right away in that same verse, it says, Et Yaakov. Don't get lost in the national movement. There's still a unit, a family unit, represented by the name Yaakov in the verse, at Yaakov, and then they go even more microscopic, Ish ubeto. This is going to be about a man and his household. And this is going to govern this entire Sefer. When we're going to bring the Korban Pesach, it's going to be Ish ubeto. Each man and his own family unit is what's going to govern and bring about the redemption. And so if Sefer Shemot, it's called in English the book of Exodus, the book of leaving Egypt. If the book of leaving Egypt is going to be focused on one thing, it's going to be focused not on a strong nation, but on a strong family unit. And if we want to read this as a book for the generations and as a blueprint for our own future redemptions, we better start heeding these instructions. There's going to be, I should just tell you in case there are children in the room, there's going to be some chilling realities that are going to be displayed right here, right on the white parchment with the black ink. It's going to tell us what we're experiencing today, the Jew in exile and what that's like. But rather than be defeated by it, we need to take these words and say, how are we going to bring our ultimate own redemption? And it's all right here for us. So the rest of the first few Pesukim go on to name the children by name. And it's very important. The book is called Shemot because of the names. And we entitled the class Making a Name for Ourselves. The name that we make for ourselves is ultimately what is going to bring about our personal redemption. And then only once we have that personal redemption could we even set our sights on the national redemption. So it starts, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. We know everybody's names already. This is not something that's necessary for us to know what their names are, but the Torah is listing them again because he wants us to see ourselves as individuals first. I can't stress that enough. And they name all the names, Yisachar, Zevulun, Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Everybody who came from Yaakov was 70 nefesh. Yosef had already been in Mitzrayim. Yosef dies, that whole generation dies. And then we know this pasuk from our Haggadah, Bnei Israel, Paru vayishretzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu bim'od me'od, vatimale ha'aretz otam. The land was filled with them is very often described, not just that they filled the land, but that they were filled with the land. They were filled with the earth. My Ashkenaz ladies taught me a word called gashmius. It means to be filled with the physical, to be filled with the earthly. And so as we move forward, verse 8, a new king comes. You all know the famous interpretations. Maybe it was the same king with new edicts. Maybe it was the same king who chose to not remember Yosef. Maybe it really was a new king. In either regard, what Yosef had done to save Mitzrayim from ruin is no longer being printed in the history books. They are now starting to rewrite history. They are now starting to revise the way the history is going to be told. And this is something we're starting to see today. The Holocaust wasn't even 100 years ago, and how many institutions are now taking it out of their history courses. And here is the propaganda in verse 9. This is the part that's uncomfortable, so I'll try and get through it quickly, but we need to expose ourselves to the realities. The Torah is sending us a strong message. And here is the king and what he's telling his people. This is the propaganda. Vayomer el amo, he tells his people, Hine am b'nei Israel. Enjoy verse 9, because you're not going to see our name B'nai Israel spoken about again. Very quickly in these verses, we're going to be from a named nation to a nameless entity. Where have we seen that before? And so he says, here's the nation, B'nai Israel. Let me point out the obvious. They are Rav ve'atzum mimenu. Rav doesn't just mean plentiful or more populous. It also means they are wealthy. Yeshli Rav. I have a lot very often means financially. Ve'atzum mimenu. And they are not just stronger than us. Otzem would depict the idea of strength, but we have chozek to talk about physical strength. They're otzem. They have a confidence about them. They have a strength that comes from within. Then he uses this word mimenu. Not only are they richer, not only are they more either idealistic or confident than we are, but they are who they are mimenu, from us. What they have comes from us. They've taken, now this is where the scary part comes in the propaganda. The king is not just highlighting this beautiful nation that came with 2 nickels in their pocket and picked themselves up straps, made something of themselves. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying, look at these law-abiding citizens of society who are winning all the Nobel Peace Prizes because they are inspired, because they have what to contribute to society. That's not the propaganda. What's being said is these people, they are Rav ve'atzum. The first thing we're going to do now in the next verse is, besides highlighting their privilege, we're going to highlight a hypothetical scenario. Hava nitchakema lo. You think they're so smart? Because smarts and education is usually what yields this otzim and this rav. Hava nitchakema lo. Let's outsmart them. So what we're doing, what we're proposing to a nation of cultured individuals, because we know that Egypt, the Mesopotamian region at that time, was the most cultured land in its time. And we know from the hieroglyphics, we know from the artifacts that were found in Egypt, they were way more advanced than their neighboring countries. So let's use our advancements. Let's outsmart them. All of a sudden, the Jewish people need to be outsmarted, because pen yirbeh, let me come up with a hypothetical scenario that's going to instill fear. Pen yirbeh, what would happen if they were, and pen means it's a negative maybe. Perhaps maybe. Pen yikre'enu ason. Maybe something bad will happen to them. The pen is always associated with a negativity. So it's going to be negative if they multiply. And you know what might happen? V'haya ki tikrena milchama. There should happen to be a war. V'nosaf gam hu al son'enu. What's going to happen? They're going to join together with our enemy. V'nilcham banu. Now they're going to show their loyalty, not as Jewish Americans, but as American Jews, so to speak. They're going to show their loyalties to this other entity. We don't even know who they're going to be. And what's going to happen? Ve'ala min ha'aretz. Either they will leave, either it was a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to leave. And if they leave, see, this is the interesting part of why the text is so ambiguous. I don't know if they're afraid. I'm going to say they're both. They're afraid that we're going to join up with the enemy and that they're going to be Allah, the Allah min ha'aretz, and they're going to be taken out of the land. They're going to lose their land, or that we might leave, which we've seen in Eastern Europe as well as being a very big problem, is as much as you hate the Jew, you don't want him to leave because you still need him to develop your vaccines. You still need him to develop your infrastructures. You still need them as architects, as poets, as musicians, as doctors, as lawyers, as financiers. So what's the balance they want to strike? They want to keep us in the land, but they also don't want to have to fear us. So the next page sort of sets their, lays out their plan. Vayasimu alav sareh misim. What are you going to do with the wealthy people that you want to oppress? You're going to put taxes on them. How are you going to take their money? You're not going to go steal because you're a cultured, educated society. You're living, like I said, in the days where you created the hieroglyphics and alphabet. All the technologies, really a lot of them came out of Egypt. So what could you do that won't be construed as anti-human and tax the people excessively? Because this way the taxing will definitely give them a hit them where it hurts. If they're wealthy, then we could tax them, and taxing them will make it difficult for them. But also, vayiven are miskenot, misken, a miskin is a person who's a city of pain, and they built these cities of pain for Paro. It even sounds, it reads, unfortunately, like they built these, what were they called? The cities that they put the people in before they took them to the camps. The
Ghettos.
ghettos, thank you. I was looking for that word. So they build aremis kenot, they build ghettos, so to speak. And they build Pitom, they build Ramesses. And the craziest part of this whole story is the more they tortured them in verse 12, the more they multiplied, which was completely anti-intuitive. You would think that torturing the men would have them not be able to be with their wives and not be able to produce children. But what happens is, Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Israel, they are disgusted, they are repulsed from Bnei Israel because now they're anti-human. It doesn't make sense. These people are monsters. They're shiratzim. You could call them whatever you want. Vaya'avidu Mitzrayim et Bnei Israel baparech. This is, now we got these words Bnei Israel back. But you'll notice that while they were torturing them, the people became an entity, a persona non grata. They became vayasimu alav sare misim, leman anoto besivlotam. They lose their names, they lose their identities. It's the equivalent of giving them numbers, so to speak, because you can't kill a person who has a name and an identity, but if they're just a statistic, that might make it much more easy for them to do. And as we move forward, and this is where I want to start moving to, he has a final solution, Paro. And what is his final solution? First, they embitter their lives with hard work, with chomed, levenim, building bricks, and all types of work in the sadeh. And the commentaries say how the work that they did was work that didn't produce a sense of satisfaction because they wanted to really break their spirit. Remember, I told you they were rav ve'atzum. They had this otzem, they had this inner strength. That's what they wanted to break. As much as they wanted to break them physically, they wanted to break their spirit. And then we have this beautiful story of these two meyaldot ivriot, whether they were Jewish midwives who were the midwives for their fellow Jews, or they were Egyptian midwives, which makes the story even that more admirable, that they were Egyptian midwives that were stationed to help the Jewish women give birth. Regardless, we are introduced to these two women, and their names are Shifra and Puah. And the commentaries like to tell us that they were actually Yocheved and Miriam. Either way, these women are at the top of their game because as they're giving birth, Paro had told them, when you look at the birth stool, if you see it's a boy, then you need to kill it. But if it's a girl, you could let her live. And again, they didn't have cameras in the delivery room in those days. When the woman would give birth, for a tiny infant to be snuffed out, you put a pressure point and you stop the air flow. In 2 seconds, you can tell the mother that it was a stillborn. And this is what Paro wanted the midwives to carry out. This is the first instance that we see that Paro is willing to stop at nothing. It was no longer a political move like high taxes or like hard work. This is now we're talking life and death. And this is where the story takes a very big turn, because in verse 17, we have people standing up and saying, I can't accept this. There's just so much, in the crimes against humanity, when they had all the trials for the people, let's say in the Holocaust, most of the defense, the defense was predominantly, I was just following orders. And this is where the Torah says, when it's a crime against humanity, you don't have the right to follow orders if the orders are murder. And so here, what happens is that Vatir'ena hameyaldot et ha-Elohim. Please notice, please celebrate that this is the first mention of Ha-Elohim, of God in our story. How does God come into the picture? When they're in Mitzrayim, the meyaldot, the fear, the reverence, the awe of God brings God into the picture. He doesn't come on his own. He's brought in by these magnanimous, magnificent actions of these meyaldot. And they decided to defy the king, and they didn't do what the king said, and they allowed the boys to live. And when Melech Mitzrayim calls them and says, "What are you doing?" And it's interesting that he doesn't make a national edict, because at that point, the civilized people may not have accepted this form of murder. So he goes to the grassroots, he goes to the meyaldot. You know, they say that people back in the day that were the actual midwives were women who couldn't give birth themselves. They didn't have their own families. They didn't have their own children. So he figured his secret is safe with these women because they didn't have a standing in society. And so even if they were to try and, publicize what the king was telling them to do, they were really lower members of society. Nobody was going to really listen to them. So this was kept as covert as possible, because the truth is the king is having an audience with meyaldot. If you think about it, why is he meeting with them? Because when you want to do something that the rest of society won't agree with, you have to find people that you think you could influence and people that you think you could control to keep your secret. And so he calls them back. And now he's having all these audiences with the meyaldot. And he says, well, why didn't you do what I told you to do? And they said, the nashim ivriyot, the Jewish women, they are chayot hena. They wanted to say that they are like animals that could give birth on their own and don't need any assistance, but they're really saying they are chayot. They are women of chayim. They are women who bring life into being. Beterem tavo alehen, before you even get to them, they already gave birth. And now we have this word Elohim again, and Elohim rewards the meyaldot. And the nation is able to be the exact things that the king was afraid of. Rav ve'atzum, that's what they are. Vayerev ha'am, vaya'atzmu me'od. And then there's a little piece that the narrator tells us. And by the way, because the meyaldot had this reverence and awe for Elohim, they were given their own houses. Rashi likes to say, I think it's a beautiful reading, Bate Leviah and Bate Kehuna. From, if they indeed are Miriam and Yocheved, who's going to come from them are the Leviim, and from the Leviim, we're going to have the Kohanim. And now Paro decides at this point he needs to take matters into his own hands. Verse 22, he tells his whole nation, he recruits them. And this is a little bit scary, that in 22 verses, we went from the diplomatic, what are we going to do about this Jewish problem that they're so wealthy and they're so powerful, to, he tells Lechol Amo. At this point, verse 22, it became a national movement that Kol haben hayilod hayeorat hashlichuhu. Some people read this to say that in order to kosher it, that every Jewish boy, even the Jewish boys of the Egyptians, had to be thrown into the Yeor. And this, what kind of a society would not overthrow this government? What type of a society would follow these laws is scary in and of itself. But for today, we're getting now to our lesson plan. I needed to give you that, was the introduction. This is where we're living. Now we drop the pin. We're in Egypt. And buckle your seatbelts, because we're going to read two stories, not one. What we're about to read, we've seen. It's a been there, done that. But you may be surprised where we've been and when we've done. So let's look together, verse 1, chapter 2. Vayelech ish mi bet Levi. The first thing we should notice as we start chapter 2, you'll notice throughout the progression of the verses is that nobody is named. In the book of Shemot with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, and so on, all these names, what happened to everybody? All of a sudden, everybody's lost their identity. Scary. And so there's a man, there's an ish. And I like to say, because I think we had enough of the scariness of it, let's read this now in a building forward oriented way. Verse 1, chapter 2 of Shemot is speaking to us. We know Torah was written for all generations. So the reason that it's not giving any names, we often say that when text omits names, it's an invitation for us to insert our own name here. When it comes to redemption, it could come from anybody, from any family, any one of us, every one of us needs to see ourselves as the potential redeemer. So Vayelech Ish, a man. Yes, it's a man of import. Usually when they use the word Ish, it means an important man. But he goes out from Bet Levi and he takes a Bat Levi. Nobody has a name. We know that this is Amram and Yocheved, but the Torah is deliberately keeping them and their identities anonymous. Vatahar Haisha, the woman gives birth. Vateled ben, she gives birth to a son. Vatere oto ki tovhu, she sees him that he is tov. All we did last week is talk about tov. What does it mean to be tov? It means that he's created ki tov with those same words that God used to create humanity. When God saw all of his creations and he saw the ki tov, she saw him as a human created with godliness and dignity. And so what does she do? She hides him for 3 months. Velo yachla od hasefino. She no longer could hide him. So she takes a tevat gome. She takes this is the only other place where we see the word teva, which we had seen with Noach, which some people will say that Noach and Moshe had a lot in common. They're both going to start and regenerate their people and their nations. But regardless, this teva, which is interesting, I think it's Aviva Zornberg who writes, Vatichmera bachemer. She actually takes it and she coats it with clay. You see, the teva of Noach was covered with kofir, with pitch to make it waterproof. This actually doesn't make a lot of sense because clay is heavy. And for her to coat it in clay isn't as sensible as we may think, unless we want to, the Torah wants to tell us that you've read about the commentaries that say that they were putting the babies inside the bricks and they were using those bricks to build the cities for Paro. It's possible that they take this from here because what she's doing is it's as if she's putting her baby in a brick, she's putting her baby in the clay, but she's very, very sharp. She knows that the king made an edict that says that all of the babies have to go to the Yeorah. It says tashlichuhu, throw them in. So she threw him into the Yeor. The only difference is that before she threw him in, I know you said to put him in the Yeor, I put him on the Yeor. If the officer wants to give her a ticket, it's a technicality. I'm still doing what the king said. I'm still taking my child and I'm still putting him in the Yeor. The fact that he's in a floating device is another story. And yes, the clay is not what made it waterproof. It's the kofir that's going to make it waterproof, the zephet. So she puts her child in there, she puts him on the sifat hayeor, and all of a sudden we see another person on the scene. And this is his sister. We're going to spend some time talking about this. His sister stands, and we love the word vatetatzev, don't we? It comes from the word nitzav, nitziv. We spent a lot of time talking about nitzavim, the idea of standing upright. This is not a position, a physical position. That would be the word omed. Rather than being omed, she is vatetatzav. She is standing at attention. She knows what she needs to do. She stands merachok, from afar, to see what him. All of a sudden, the daughter of Paro comes down to wash in the Yeor, and she comes with her ne'arot, and she sees the teva in the suf, and she stretches out her arm, and she takes this teva. She opens it. We're going to talk about all this in a minute. I just want to give you the text, the content, and then we'll unpack it. Vatiftach, she opens it. Let me just mute everybody. Hold on a second. She, give me a second, sorry. Okay, she opens it up and she sees the Yeled, and suddenly in one verse, he goes from being a Yeled to a Na'ad, to a young man, and he's crying, and she has mercy on him, and she says this must be from one of the Ivrim. And there are all commentaries. He was wrapped in a talet, or he had a brit milah. Regardless, all of a sudden, and this to me, if you ask me to put my finger on a pasuk that really defines the beginning of the redemption, it's this verse right here. Vatomer achoto el bat paro. Now, I don't know if this was planned in advance. I don't know if she ever imagined in a bazillion years that the daughter of the dictator who made the edict to kill the boys is the one that's going to find the basket. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But what she does here is she first and foremost has the audacity to speak to royalty. She's nothing. She's a nobody. She's from the slaves and she's a child. But yet it seems like she's having a conversation with her. It doesn't, even the language that she uses. Vatomer achoto el bat Paro, his sister, who also has no name here, says to the daughter of Paro, Ha'elech, would you like me to go and call for you a nursemaid, a wet nurse from the Jewish people that can nurse this child for you? Vatomed la bat Paro, lechi. They're speaking on very casual terms. It's as if they have conversations and they're BFFs. She says, yeah, sure. And the Alma, I want you to notice that here she's called an Alma. We're going to talk about that also. So the sister, who's the sister of the baby, who's called an Alma, goes and calls the mother of the child. And Paro's daughter tells the mother of the child, she doesn't know, or she does, take this child, nurse him, and I will pay you. The daughter of Paro upsets. Let's talk about this. How on earth is the mother, we'll call her Yocheved for sake of putting a story together, how on earth is Yocheved going to explain why her baby is still alive when there's an edict that he should be killed? So she's going to say, it's not my baby. I'm nursing somebody else's baby. And the daughter of Paro, who's corroborating the story, is doing something even greater, which is giving her royal money, royal payment, coins, Egyptian coins, so that she could say, look here, I'm being paid to be a wet nurse. Why would somebody pay me to nurse my own baby? So she's even giving her the alibi. And she, Vatikach Haisha Hayeled, the woman takes the child, she nurses him, Vayigdal, all these words are going to come into play. The child grows up, she brings him back to Bat Paro, where this child becomes a son to Bat Paro. And the child, up until now, nobody has a name. Not the Ish, not the Isha, not the sister, and not even the daughter of Paro, who's later on identified as Batya, that she gave Moshe a name, so God's going to give her a name. You're going to be my daughter, Batya, the daughter literally of God, or some people explain it to be that Paro named her the daughter of God, seeing himself as a God. Regardless, she names him Moshe, and the name Moshe means, the word Moshe really means child, like Meseh, like Rameseh, Ra is the son. Ramses, the son child, for instance, would be Ramses. This is just Meses, Moshe, it just means child. But we should know that from the time she calls him child, and the commentaries say that he had 7 different names before this. His mother called him something, his father called him something, his sister he had all these other names, but the Torah and God is only going to call him by the name that the daughter of Paro gives him, and she gives him this name saying, Ki min hamayim mishitihu, because I drew him from the water. Okay, so all of this you really could have studied on your own without me. I wanted to go through these verses with you because I wanted to be reminded of a very similar story with very similar circumstances, almost identical to these circumstances, except with a completely different outcome. So we've had before a story of 2 mothers, a Jewish mother and an Egyptian mother, that are sharing one child, right? We have the story of Sarah, the Jewish mother, and Hagar. Let's make our story a little juicier and call her the Egyptian princess, because that's what the commentaries say she was. They say she was the daughter of that Pharaoh. So we have a daughter of Pharaoh and Sarah, and we have a daughter of Pharaoh, and we're going to call her Yocheved for now in our story. And in both of those stories, one mother is the birth mother and one mother is the adoptive mother. In both of those stories, we have a child who is in danger. We'll go through it easily. We'll say first, the birth mother in both stories is being tortured. Hagar was tortured by Sarah, vate aneha. And here we have in our story, vaya anu oto. We were tortured, they were tortured. The only crazy thing in these stories, I'll just give you a few more comparisons. Not only is the birth mother tortured, but the child's life is endangered. His life is hanging in the balance. I would say possibly not just once, but twice. Hagar runs away the first time. We don't know if she miscarries or what happens. The angel sends her back. And the second time she runs away, she's chased away, and Hagar throws Ishmael under the bushes because she doesn't want to see him die. So she has 2 life-threatening experiences for her son. Moshe also. Moshe is here bobbing around on the river with his sister watching him. His future is definitely compromised. And later on, he also has to run away for his life because he is going to want to be killed. Pharaoh has a big wanted sign, dead or alive, with his picture on it, and he has to run away to Midian. We have a lot of these comparisons. Both children, by the way, end up being saved by water. Moshe is saved by the river, the Or that he's going to be bobbing along on, and Ishmael is saved because all of a sudden there's a well that comes into Hagar's view. And in both of the stories, and I think this is where it starts to get most important, in both of the stories, there is a female who is watching merachok. Both stories, in the story of Ishmael, it says specifically, let me just see if I can find the exact words for you. Vatashlech hayeled, she throws her child, and she stays harchek, she stays away, and she says, I'm talking about Hagar, when they finished the water that Abraham had given them, she throws her child under the bushes, and she says, this is our whole day, ki amra, this is what Hagar had said about her own son Ishmael. Al ir'eh bemot hayeled. I don't want to see child die. This is, where's my friend? We'll talk about it in a minute, but this is the worst case scenario. This is Hagar, the mother of her child, the birth mother of the child, imagining that her child is going to die and accepting the worst case scenario and practically burying him, putting him under those. Our story takes a huge change. Why? Because what our sister does in the story, Shvatetatsev in verse 4 in our story, she stands merachok and she says, Lede'a ma ye'aselo. She's standing in anticipation of da'at, of knowledge. Knowledge and da'at in Torah is always inspiration and knowledge of God's inner workings of the world. So her da'at, like the etz hada'at, for instance, her da'at is based not on the worst case scenario. She's waiting to see how the story unfolds, and she's only waiting because she wants to be witness to the miracle or what's going to take. She doesn't know. She can't, and this is, maybe I should stop here. Sometimes we don't know the end of the story. If we only read up to verse 4, we wouldn't know how this would work itself out. And if any of us was the author of this story, I don't think Steven Spielberg himself would have come up with the scenario where the daughter of the dictator himself who made the edict is the one who's going to not only find the child, but have the child nursed by its own mother and then raise it as her own. You can't make this stuff up. And what is Miriam teaching us? What is the Torah teaching us over here? I see my Auntie Flora, and she's the one who just told me yesterday, we have to expect miracles, right, Auntie Flora? She said, you can't make it through the world. You can't make it through life unless you expect the miracles. This is who Miriam was. Who was Hagar? Hagar was embracing the worst case scenario. Miriam was embracing the best case scenario. And so as we start to put these stories together, and just to give you a couple of pieces together, they both, Moshe and Ishmael, and I know sometimes it makes it an uncomfortable parallel. Again, why are we putting Moshe and Ishmael in the same sentence? Who's doing that? Why would we want to do that? Last week we took Yosef and we put him together with Esav, and maybe we were uncomfortable, but at the end we had to start to say we need to be able to, and Moshe is going to do it in this week's Parashah, we need to be able to have sadlid ot. We need to be able to turn our neck this way and this way. We need to be able to see the entirety of human beings. And so if the Torah, this is not me, if the Torah is going to use words like vayigdal for both Moshe and Ishmael, and it's going to call them both a ben and a yelid and a na'ad in very close succession, and it's going to have them both crying. In our story, Moshe is crying and she has mercy on him. Right there in verse 6. With Ishmael, too, he's going to be crying. And in his story where he cries and where she cries, what does it say? Vayishma Elohim et kol hana'ar. God hears the cry of the one who is crying. There's a beautiful midrash on the Ishmael one where God answers Ishmael rather than answering Hagar, because the person who cries for himself or prays for himself, that prayer is heard first by God. But regardless, all of these comparisons start to put a picture together for us. And what's strange is, I know when I said Moshe is the child here and Ishmael's the child there, but guess what? We just had a turning of the tables. What do I mean we turned the tables? Well, if the birth mother was Sarah, right? I'm sorry. With Ishmael, I apologize. With Ishmael, the birth mother was Hagar. With Moshe, the birth mother is Yocheved. We would not expect that. You, me, we would expect Hagar and Bat Paro to line up. We would expect Sarah and Yocheved to line up. We would that makes us comfortable. That makes us feel like we could predict. God saying, stop predicting. I'm governing your world. And I love you guys, but your frame, your scope, your ability to see the miraculous in your physical form is very limited. So let me turn your world upside down in showing how redemption comes. Don't think that you have it all mapped out, because although Hagar was the birth mother in that story, Yocheved is the birth mother in this story. The Jewish woman is the one who's having the child. And in the other story, the surrogate, the one that was supposed to take care of the child, was Sarah. And I don't know that she ended up living up to her part of the deal. Ulai ibane mimena. Plan was for her to, sorry, I'm just going to X this out. The plan was for her to be built up through this child, which never happens. She sends the child away. So what does God do? He puts Bat Paro to play the role that Sarah should have, could have, or would have played. Here, Bat Paro is taking care of a child that she didn't even commission into being, that she's taking her life into her hands, that she's defying her father's decree for. And so we ask ourselves these questions. And on top of that, let me just add a few more pieces. If we actually went back, and if you're looking to do this comparison, it's Bereshit chapter 21 gives us the story. I'm going to just read it, some things to you quickly. What's so unusual is that in our story, nobody has a name except for Moshe. And the opposite is true in the story with Sarah and Hagar. And in the story of Sarah and Hagar, Sarah, and this is a crazy, I didn't notice it till yesterday. I opened it and looked at it again. I said, holy moly, chapter 21, which speaks about Ishmael and getting thrown out and crying and almost dying and being shown a well. Guess what? Ask me how many times his name appears in his story. It's not 7. It's 0. It's 0. He's not even the star of his own show. Instead of calling him Ishmael, you'll see in verse 9, Sarah sees Ben Hagar HaMitzrit Asher Yalda LeAbraham. We're using 6 words instead of saying Ishmael. And she tells Abraham, Garesh ha'ama hazot ve'et bena, because lo yirash ben ha'ama im beni im Yitzchak. Of course, Yitzchak has a name, but you know who has no names here? Ishmael. Ishmael is the one who became totally nameless. And in his parallel, Moshe is the one that the daughter of Paro says, I'm going to give him a name. In a society where they started branding numbers on the forearms of the Jews, this woman said, this woman meaning Batya, says, this stops here. Now I am going to give the child not a number, I'm going to give the child a name, and a name that represents being saved and being spared from the waters. And so as we put the 2 stories together, there's something very, very interesting that takes place. Because in the same story, where we have the almost identical circumstances, just the players are changed and then reversed, what happens here is we have Avraham. So Sarah says, we've done this before, I'll just repeat it in case you didn't hear it. Sarah says, Garesh et ha'ama ve'et bena. I want you to chase away this ama hazot, this not calling her an isha. You can give her a gerusha. You don't even have to divorce her, because I'm not even considering her your wife. You can throw her out because she, as status of an Amma, doesn't get an inheritance and doesn't get the things befitting of a wife. Because there's no way that she or her son, now that she isn't qualified as a wife, her son doesn't qualify as an inheritor. So I want you to, in verse 10, I'm in Bereshit chapter 21, she says, I want you not to just throw her, I want you to throw her, her child, and I want to make sure that you don't sign any type of legal documents affording him any type of inheritance. Now, Abraham is not so happy with this arrangement. It may be legal, it may be sanctioned by God, because in verse 12, Elohim tells him, don't let this thing be bad in your eyes. You listen to your wife Sarah, Shema Bekola. You listen to what she says, because Yitzchak is going to be your future progeny. And don't worry, this Amma and her son will also become into great nations. But verse 14 changes the entire trajectory. I believe verse 14, if you own your Chumashim, which I implore you to do, then you will highlight this, because this is the beginning of the end in many ways. It's the beginning of the redemption, but it's also the beginning of the enslavement. It's all in verse 14. If you need to drop a pin on how this whole thing started, yes, it started with Yosef and his brothers, and they ended up in Egypt, but guess what? It started way before that. And so let's look at verse 14. Abraham gets up in the morning. Vayashkem baboker always means there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of awakening. There's a sense of having to do this bidding. And what does he do? He gets up early in the morning. He takes lechem, he takes bread, he takes water, and he gives it to Hagar, and he puts it on her shoulder, and he gives it to the boy as well. And instead of gareshet ha'ama, we've learned this many times together, we have this beautiful word. Give it a circle, put little stars around it. Vayishalcheha. He sends her out. So rather than chase her out, get out and stay out, he sends her out. What is a shaliach? A shaliach is somebody who you intend to have them return. A shaliach is somebody that you send out with the expectations that they're going to bring something back to you. And she goes and she gets lost in the desert of Be'er Shava. So let's talk about this for 10 seconds. We know when we sit at our Seder table, we break a piece of the afikoman, we put it in a bag, and we go around the table. At least this is our custom. And we say, Mish'arotam, Serurot, Besimotam, Al Shechmam, Ubnei Israel Asu, Kidbar Moshe. Right? And we put that lechem on out. Why are we doing it like this? I don't know if everybody has that custom up, but we do. We put it on our shoulder and we say, Serurot besimlotam al shechmam. Why are we putting the bread on our shoulders? Yes, they did carry, you ever see the, Aunt Jemima, Tropicana, all those people, they carry the baskets on their heads, on their shoulders. Yes, that's true. But I believe what we're reenacting is the fact that Abraham gave Hagar food to carry on her shoulders. And that's why when we leave Egypt, he's going to give, the Jewish man is going to give the Egyptian food and water to carry on her way out. When we leave Egypt, what does Paro say? Here's your people, kach valech, take them and leave. Same like this. But since with some type of compassion, with food and with water, what happens? Not only do we ultimately leave Egypt with the same food and bread on our shechem, on our shoulders, but these words where it's vayishlach, that he sends, who does he send? He sends the Amma. He sends the maidservant. And in our story, in our chapter today, when we go back to Shemot, I believe, and I've said this a lot of times, so I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but I think it's a very important lesson. This phrase that we have in chapter 2 of Shemot, where the daughter of Paro in verse 5 is Vatishlach et amata, she's going to stretch out her amah. It might be Vatishlach et ha'amah, the way that Abraham sent out his amah, who was Hagar. She now is sending out either her amah, her maidservant, or her arm, either one, in payment for the kindness that was shown to her by the Jew. I mean, the parallels of the Egyptian princess repaying the kindness to the Jew are almost uncanny over here. And I want to talk about Miriam now. Miriam is the outlier. She's the piece that doesn't fit into the puzzle. If you want to put together Sarah and Bat Paro as the surrogates, and you want to put Hagar and Yocheved as the birth mothers, and you want to put Ishmael and Moshe as the two babies, we have all of those components. But then we have an extra piece here, and I think she's the star of the show. And I'd like to end today's class talking a little bit about Miriam and how this story is a reparation for the previous story. And I think it all lies in Miriam. What's beautiful about Miriam is in verse 8, she was called Achoto. Like I said, nobody here has names. She was called Achoto various times, but by the time we get to verse 8, we see this beautiful word. Vatomer la bat paro. Bat paro tells her, Lichi, go. In other words, go and call for a wet nurse. When she goes, she becomes the Alma. What does that mean, that she becomes the Alma? There's only one other person that's called an Alma in Torah. If you want to put it into the chat, I think I will be able to see it. If you know who the only other Alma was, the Alma was Rivka. And let's talk about this together now. What is Miriam's claim to fame? If you just wanted to make her a crown and inscribe something on Miriam's crown, most people would say she's called Miriam HaNevi'ah. She gets her name. She's first called Miriam by that name by the Yam Suf, when she brings the women and she brings the musical instruments and they play the songs that are going to celebrate the miracle that God did in splitting the sea. And when we learn about that story, we say, what kind of a person, we had studied this before, if you only have a couple of minutes to pack a couple of things, who's taking big fat drums? Who's packing timbrels? Why would that? My husband would kill me. We travel carry-on only. So imagine you're leaving Egypt. They don't even have time for the bread to rise, for goodness sakes. Oh, but wait, I forgot my tuba. Oh, your kid wants to pack a football to take on the trip. Nah, we don't have room for those kind of things. But what does Miriam, and they call her Miriam HaNevi'ah, and they give her that name in that place specifically because her vision, her sense of prophecy was born here in our Parashah. It was born from a place that says, I don't know how, I don't know why, I don't know when, but I do know that there's going to be a happy ending. I do want to be there when the happy ending happens. I'm going to stand by and watch what happens with my brother who's bobbing along on the Yeor, because I know I'm watching with anticipation. And that same attitude is what accompanies her at the end of their stay in Egypt, that she's able to tell the ladies, by the way, unless you believe something with that much passion and that much conviction, How are you going to convince? Okay, one thing is for you to pack drums, but to convince all the ladies to pack their musical instruments, you have to really speak from a place of knowledge. She doesn't think it, she doesn't put, she owns it, she expects it. She's saying there's going to be a reason for us to celebrate, to rejoice, and to sing. And ladies, I want you to be ready. I want all of us to be ready with song and with music, even before they left Egypt. For all they know, the gates are going to be closed and they're not even going to be able to leave the city. Don't you worry. You pack the instruments and God's going to take care of the rest. And so what happens here is that she has a certain sense, you could call it optimistic, you can call it positivity, call it whatever you want. But Miriam is the one who changes the whole story. Because instead of waiting to see the child die, she's waiting to see the child live. And in a crazy way, the Torah is telling us, the way it's saying that the Redeemer could be anybody. It could be an ish, it could be an isha, it could be an achot, it could be an ach, it could be a ben, it could be a na'ar, it could be a yeled, it could be anybody could be the Redeemer. But then, like I told you, the Sefer started. It starts with the national movement and moves to the tribal, direct individual families. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Torah is saying it takes a village to raise a child. It takes the entire nation. Sometimes emat. Sometimes it takes the energies from multiple nations. We need an Egyptian princess and a Jewish princess from the family of Levi. We need everybody to invest in this child. And if you invest in a child, and I think the message to compare it with Ishmael is the Torah's way of saying, don't write anybody off. Everybody who's created by God, who has godliness inside them, could rise to be the savior, even a Ishmael. Had he had the proper tutelage of his father, his mother Hagar, his surrogate mother Sarah, had they all embraced him and invested in him and worked on him like Miriam is doing here with her brother. I'll say one extra piece. I'll finish that statement. It's saying that anybody has the capability of rising. It wants to tell us, by the way, this is not to say you blew it with Ishmael and he turned into who he turned into because you didn't invest in him. That's not what this is saying. It's speaking, it's a future-oriented message that's saying, ladies and gentlemen, please be aware that at every turn of every corner, every day, a Redeemer is being born. Are you nurturing that Redeemer to fulfill his greatest and truest potential? Well, you know what Miriam is doing? Because we speak a lot about this too. Miriam is showing us that even though the Torah is going to start in a vertical way, starting from father and mother to child, a family tree that is depicted from parent to child usually goes in a vertical way. And then what happens is the arms come out and we have the brothers and sisters are all on a horizontal plane. And what Moshe is getting here is not just the benefit of the parental vertical connections, he's getting as well this horizontal support. He's going to get it from his sister Miriam on one side. He's going to get it from his brother Aharon on the other side. So the Torah is telling us we need this horizontal strength. You need your brothers and your sisters as much as you need your heritage, as much as you need your father, your grandfather. That's why I thought today's dedications were so beautiful, because they were honoring parents and grandparents. And then at the same time, they were honoring with Sheba and Rabbi, they were honoring each other and their horizontal connection to learning together. All of these put together, I believe, is the way for the Torah to tell us. The only other Alma is Rivka. What did she do? Did anybody ever expect greatness from this sister of Lavan, from the daughter of Betuel? But guess what? She does the same thing. She takes upon herself to feed camels, which we did the math one time, how many gallons each camel drinks and how many camels there were, and how one little girl, maybe 3 years old, was able to feed all of them. What did she say? She's just said, I don't know how it's going to come about, but I know one thing. If I put my mind to the task and I believe that I could do it, then I'm honoring myself and I'm honoring my godliness, and I'll do whatever I can myself, and God, you'll do the rest. And that's the other Alma, that other Alma who also brings salvation through waters, Mayim, Chayim, which is life. This is what the Torah is telling us. If I have to end Parashat Shemot with one thought, I'll end it with the actual scene of Moshe at the burning bush. And the scene says specifically, he was a ro'eh tzon, and he goes and he sees this bush, and he asks himself, the sneh is bo'er ba'esh, but enenu uchal, but it's not being consumed. He sees something that doesn't make sense. And rather than reject it, he embraces it. He too, he has a sister who embraces the expectation of miracles, the bringing about of the impossible. I can't write the story, but I trust that God's going to knock my socks off and surprise the wits out of me. That's what Miriam is saying. And Moshe, same thing. And the text says quickly, and this is where God's name comes into the picture. Vayad Hashem, the Yud Ke Vav Ke, the God of miracles, the God who partners with mankind in the physical world to bring out the things we least expect to ever come to fruition. Vayad Hashem, that God sees, Kisad Lirot, that Moshe took his blinders off, that he was willing to turn this way, he was willing to turn that way, he was willing to widen his scope of vision. Don't just look through the narrow lens of possibility and probability. You need to be sadly or you need to widen your lens to be able to look through the improbable and the impossible. And once Moshe does this, God calls him from the inside, from within this impossible tree that's not being consumed by fire. And he calls them and he says, Moshe, Moshe. He's calling all of us. He's not just calling Moshe. He's calling all of us. And he's telling every one of us the same way a fire and its wood could coexist. One doesn't need to burn out the other. One doesn't need to extinguish the other. The world of the physical and the spiritual need to coexist in your reality. Your reality has to be made up of part practical and part ridiculous, impossible, inconceivable, or what I prefer to call miraculous. Those two must be mixed the same way the bush is mixed with the fire. God is depicting for us his presence in our world, and he's saying, please, for 1 second, don't doubt. Remember the words of my Auntie Flora. There are miracles happening every day. You just need to believe and be open to them. Sometimes we see them and they are a nes galoi, a miracle that we can see, and sometimes they are hidden. But we must always, and in the merit of the positive collective attitude that we all have, that the best case scenario is going to be what is going to be revealed for us. I also want to say a special prayer for my friend Leah Bat Yittel. I hope and pray that the results of all of her efforts and all of her treatments will surprise her and restore her to even greater strength than originally. I pray for everybody to have a beautiful, beautiful week. Somebody's saying that I should repeat the dedications, and somebody wrote to the Refuah Shelema. So I'm going to repeat today's dedication in case it wasn't recorded. We're thanking Esther Adis and her family for sponsoring this week's class in loving memory of her grandmother, Lulu Bat Salha, and Liluy Nishmat Selma Kassin, Selma Bat Lulu, who's her mom, who would have celebrated her 100th birthday last month. Today, Liluy Nishmat Naftali Gad, Naftali Ben Leah, and Nisan Gad Alav Hashalom. May his neshama be raised. And we thank Shifra Gad, Vanessa Gad, Lily Ishai, and Peggy Dahan for their generosity. And last but not least, Shiba and Robbie, thank you. I love you. You're really a great addition to our class. They are sponsoring it in honor of Robbie's birthday and in their joy of learning together. So thank you everybody for joining. If you'd like to unmute yourselves, feel free. I'm actually going to take, wow.
Thank you very much, Yashikoach.
Thank you.
Irina,
Thank you. Above and beyond. Above and beyond.
Thank you,
Thank you,
I
Vivien,
want
so
to thank,
much.
I'm sorry, I did not.
Thank you.
Irina.
Gorgeous.
Vivian,
Thank you.
you made my birthday special.
Oh, Robbie, thank you. I don't see you, I miss you.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. In Syrian, we say Abal Meo Eshrin. Wishing you 100 happy
Thank you.
and healthy.
Happy birthday.
you.
Thank you, Vivian.
I want to thank
Thank you,
Irina
Vivian.
Gad as
Thank
well.
you.
Wasn't on my thing, but thank you.
Vivian, all your prayers should reach Akisei Kavod.
Amen, amen.
Amen.
Vivian, how do you, Vivian, in the name Yocheved, you have Kavod. That is an
Love
incidental.
No, it's definitely not incidental. And I love that you pointed that out because kaved means to give weight to things and not considering them as light and incidental.
But isn't it,
Maybe you can play with that in the clay. I don't know, but that's a beautiful comment.
it's interesting, Vivian, you said that they wanted to tax us, the Egyptians. We are seeing that today in secular society with this bargain Biden. He wants to place 80% taxes on American businesses. It's everything that the Egyptians did. He's appointing Jew haters.
No. Let's not get into politics.
He's appointing Jew haters in his administration.
Listen
So
to me,
many of them.
Gail, we have to put all our faith, all our trust. We have to do our part. And Hashem has protected us in the past, and He will continue to. Look, we're in Galut. We have to accept.
Alavai.
We have to accept and recognize that we're in a host country, but we also have to accept and expect that Hashem wants us to survive. He wants us to thrive, and He wants us to continue to do His work. And that's what we can do. Those are things we can control. And we're going to focus on the things that, yes, do we have to go vote? Absolutely. But do we also have to focus on what we're here to do and what our job is and do our best? 1,000%. And that's what
Alavai.
we're learning, and we're going to spread His Torah. And that, God willing, is going to make all the difference.
Amen.
I apologize to Irina God. I didn't see your name in the dedication. Thank you very much for your generosity.
Thank you, Vivian. It was a wonderful class.
Thank you. Wonderful.
This is my best.
Thank you, Vivien. Beautiful class.
Thank you, Vivian.
Who is that? Oh, Linda, hi, I see you. I fixed my computer so I could see everybody. Anyway, thank you, Auntie Flora. Everybody have a fantastic week. Take care of yourselves. Be happy, be healthy, be safe.
You too, darling. You too, darling. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, honey. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, darling.
Bye-bye.
Love you. Bye.